I'm Alex Villarreal with the VOA Special English Education Report. Each year, George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia, presents a jazz concert. Around 1,200 people attended this year's concert in October. Yet when the program first started, the student musicians played to an almost empty theater. Ed Weiner was one of the few people in the audience when the school held the first jazz concert 10 years ago. He says the quality of the performance was outstanding, but I was shocked to see the poor attendance. So he did something about it. He found a way not only to increase attendance, but also to raise money for the community. Ed Weiner is a lawyer. He organized the concerts into a program called Jazz for Justice. The performers include students and employees from the university, along with guest musicians. The concert raises money for the Fairfax Law Foundation. The local group uses some of that money to provide free legal services to people in the community. The foundation also supports programs to help young people learn about the legal system. These include courthouse tours and education about the legal and health effects of drug and alcohol abuse. Foundation officials say the yearly concert brings in about $15,000. $5,000 of that money goes to George Mason University for scholarships for students in the Jazz Studies program. Jim Carroll directs that program. He says Jazz for Justice grew slowly, each year becoming larger and larger. And he says all the credit really goes to Ed Weiner. Mr. Weiner says the idea is to provide a meaningful experience for the young musicians. He says, "We want to keep the focus on the students. This is part of their education, and they really see that their talents can be turned into very good projects and doing good for the entire community." Trombone player Amy Luden agrees. She says, "It's all for a good cause, so I feel glad to be a part of that." Ed Weiner says he hopes Jazz for Justice can be copied in other communities in Virginia and across the country. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. You can comment on this program on our website, voaspecialenglish.com, and you can find us on Facebook and Twitter at VOA Learning English.
This is the VOA Special English Education Report. America's recession ended in June of 2009, but recovery has been slow. Many states face budget problems and have cut spending in areas including education. In California, thousands of teachers have lost their jobs. 60% of the teachers at the Mariposa Nabby Primary School in Los Angeles have received dismissal notices. Salvador Rodriguez, the school principal, has been able to provide computers for his students. "We have to keep going and make it the best year possible with all these changes," he says. But fewer teachers mean bigger classes at his school. Mr. Rodriguez says there used to be 20 students to a teacher. By next year, he expects nearly 30 students in a class. Fewer teachers also mean less individual attention. Teachers say this is true, especially in schools with large immigrant populations, where English is not the first language of many students. Los Angeles has been the nation's second largest public school system after New York City. The district has dismissed 10 to 12% of its staff during the past 2 years. John Deasy, the head of the Los Angeles Unified School District, says about half of those laid off were teachers. An education professor at the University of California, Los Angeles, John Rogers, says other states have also laid off teachers. But he says the situation in California is worse because the state was already facing a budget deficit before the recession. Also, California was spending less per student than the national average. Primary and secondary schools in California receive most of their funding from the state government. A.J. Duffy is president of the United Teachers Los Angeles Union. Mr. Duffy says the amount of funding each year depends on the economy. He says in the past 2.5 to 3 years, we've lost $20 billion in funding for public education. Superintendent John Deasy says the jobs of school librarians and nurses are also being cut. And he expects more changes if the state budget does not improve, like closing or combining schools. Most California school districts have already reduced the number of days per year that students must attend classes. Other states are also talking about shortening the school year to save money. For VOA Special English, I'm Carolyn Presutti. For more education news and for English teaching activities, go to voaspecialenglish.com.
This is the VOA Special English Education Report. 2 new studies have investigated why fewer females, compared to males, study and work in the so-called STEM subjects in the United States. Those subjects are science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. The American Association of University Women examined existing research. Its report, called Why So Few, also suggested ways to interest more girls and women in the STEM fields. The researchers found that cultural and environmental factors make a difference. Researcher Christiane Colbert says more boys than girls score very high on math tests in most countries. She says Iceland and Thailand are exceptions. In those countries, more girls than boys scored above the 99th percentile in math. The other study was carried out by the Campos Company for the Bayer Corporation in the United States. It asked more than 1,000 women and minority members of the American Chemical Society about their experiences. 77% said not enough women and minorities are working in STEM professions today. This is because they were not identified or urged to study those subjects in school. Bayer USA Executive Director Rebecca Lucor says its study produced results similar to the AAUW research. She says the survey showed there is still a lot of work to be done. Rebecca Lucor notes that students say their interest in science begins before the age of 11. So it is important to have science programs for students in elementary school. Why is it so important for girls and women to be involved in science? Christiane Corbett has one answer. She says increasing diversity in professions leads to better products and better science. Expanding and developing this science and engineering workforce is important for the nation's productivity and competitiveness. Rebecca Lucor says scientific professions need more and better workers. She says all citizens should understand science, and she says it is important for everyone in the workforce to be able to think creatively, work in teams, and adapt to change. And that's the VOA Special English Education Report. Is science a popular field of study for girls in your country? You can comment at our website at voaspecialenglish.com. You can also find us on Facebook.
This is the VOA Special English Education Report. There are schools of fish and there are schools for fishermen. The Cod Academy is a year-long program in Maine, one of the New England states in the American Northeast. The academy is new. The idea is to train current or former ocean-going fishermen to become fish farmers. Sebastian Bell is director of the Maine Aquaculture Association. That group launched the Cod Academy with the University of Maine and other partners. Mr. Bell says the academy teaches all about managing a floating farm. One of the things we've been teaching the students is how to feed the fish and not overfeed the fish, he says. You want to give them enough feed and not waste any. The students practice at 8 fish pens about 1.5 kilometers from shore. These circular pens are 50 meters wide and covered with netting to keep out seabirds. Each one holds as many as 50,000 cod. A partner in the academy, Great Bay Aquaculture of New Hampshire, operates this fish farm. Most of the cod will become someone's meal somewhere in the world. Bill Thompson is 59 years old. He served in the Navy and worked as a commercial fisherman. He says the Cod Academy made him a believer in fish farming. Even if the wild stocks came back to their fullest capacity, they still wouldn't be able to feed the world. So I think this is the way of the future. He and his son were among the first 4 students who graduated in August. Like any business, fish farming has financial risks. Program Director Sebastian Bell says students have to develop a marketing and business plan before they can graduate. Graduates can receive financial assistance from the Maine Aquaculture Association to start their own cod farm. But they will be expected to raise about half the money toward any project. Mr. Bell says the Cod Academy is based on programs to retrain displaced herring and tuna fishermen in Norway and Japan. These government-sponsored programs started more than 30 years ago. He says, "It's never been done before in America, and we're trying to see if it's a model that has some potential." Maine had just one commercial cod farm when the students graduated last month, but Mr. Bell hopes things will change. It's a native fish to Maine. The growing conditions in Maine are very good for cod, and it's kind of a natural choice for us as a state. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal.
This is the VOA Special English Education Report. Federal officials in the United States are telling schools that they need to do a better job of preventing sexual violence and helping victims. The Obama administration has released the first guidance on how schools should deal with the problem under a 1972 law. That law is known as Title IX. It bars discrimination on the basis of sex in any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. The Department of Education says sexual violence is a form of sexual harassment of students, which violates Title IX. In April, Vice President Joe Biden joined Education Secretary Arne Duncan at the University of New Hampshire to announce the new efforts. Secretary Duncan said, "Sexual violence is one of those issues we all wish didn't exist. And too often our society has chosen to ignore it rather than confronting it openly and honestly. And that denial must end. Every school would like to believe it's immune from sexual violence, but the facts suggest otherwise." A study found that 1 in 5 women is sexually assaulted while in college. About 6% of male college students say they have also been victims. Mr. Duncan said that by some estimates, more than 1 in 10 high school girls are physically forced to have sex in or out of school. He said the numbers are probably low because many sex crimes are never reported. In one recent school year, public schools reported 800 rapes or attempted rapes and almost 4,000 other cases of sexual violence. The Education Department has written a 19-page letter to all school systems, colleges, and universities that accept federal money. It explains requirements for them under Title IX in dealing with sexual violence. These include making sure victims know their rights and are kept informed about the progress of the investigation. Schools must also protect victims from suspects who may still be in school with them. Secretary Duncan says police and prosecutors have their job to do, but schools also share responsibility under federal civil rights laws. Investigations of sexual violence often take too long, he says, and the victims are not taken seriously. Victims are more likely to do poorly in school, get depressed, and abuse drugs and alcohol. For VOA Special English, I'm Carolyn Presutti. We'll have more on this subject next time. You can find links to information about dealing with sexual violence in schools at voaspecialenglish.com. VOA.com.
This is the VOA Special English Education Report. The National Park Service in the United States will mark its 100th anniversary in 2016. As it nears its second century, the Park Service plans to increase its educational programs for students and teachers. The plans include transportation support for 100,000 students each year to visit national parks to learn about nature and history. For example, Yellowstone is believed to have been the world's first national park when it was established in 1872. Other students will get a chance to see parks in faraway places through Skype and other online programs. The National Park Service also works with partners to provide education. One of its partners is a nonprofit organization called NatureBridge. NatureBridge is celebrating its 40th anniversary and says 1 million young people have taken part in its programs. The organization works with students from kindergarten through 12th grade and uses national parks as its classrooms. It provides field science programs at Yosemite National Park and 4 other locations in California and the northwestern state of Washington. Now, NatureBridge is launching an East Coast Center with a $4 million grant from Google. The program will begin in April at the Prince William Forest Park in Virginia. Students stay for 3 to 5 days in NatureBridge programs. The activities are aimed at developing their science skills. For example, they learn about different soils and study water quality under a microscope. Jason Morris is Executive Vice President of NatureBridge. He says when they are not sleeping, eating, or in a laboratory, the students spend their time outdoors. Julia Washburn is Associate Director of Education and Interpretation for the National Park Service. She says in a time of budget cuts, the agency has to find ways to still meet its goals. We are not likely to get a lot of money in this current economy. This is about doing different work with the money that we have and redirecting resources into it. Ms. Washburn says one of the most important services that the Park Service provides every day is nature interpretation. She says interpretation is a form of informal education. So park rangers are interpreters. They orient you to the place you are in and help you make connections, emotional and intellectual connections, with the place. For VOA Special English, I'm Mario Ritter.
This is the VOA Special English Education Report. One World Education is a nonprofit group based in Washington. The group has a program in which teachers develop curriculum based on student writing. The students are in middle and high school and write essays about culture and international issues. Students are invited to write about an issue they find important. Then professionally developed learning materials based on chosen essays are used in schools to teach other students. Eric Goldstein is the executive director of One World Education. He says the essays can serve as a writing and learning guide for students. His group has worked with over 1,500 student writers over the past 4 years. Mr. Goldstein is himself a former classroom teacher. He and another teacher, Emily Chariello, began forming plans for One World Education in 2006. The group publishes a study unit each month from August through May. Each unit of curriculum starts with a chosen essay called a One World Reflection. Mr. Goldstein says the subjects have ranged from single parenthood to protecting rainforests to exploring Arab cultures. He says students have written One World reflections on women in the Muslim world, on Islamic media, on Arab media, and on Arab identity. One student wrote about being Muslim and how she appears to other people in her neighborhood. Layla Kunesh of Washington wrote about her feeling that the media in the United States are often unfair to Muslims. A learning activity based on her reflection called for students to collect examples of media stories and discuss whether or not that was true. Layla was chosen as a One World Student Ambassador last year. 12 are chosen each year. Their reflections are published on the group's website, along with learning activities linked to common reading and writing standards used for testing. Isabel Nampakwa Kapotwe of Zambia was also chosen as a student ambassador. She wrote about Zambia's cultural traditions, its languages, religions, and tourist attractions. But she also wrote about poverty and disease and how, after her parents died, her grandmother made a home for the remaining family. One activity based on her reflection called for research into the care given by grandparents as heads of households in today's society. For VOA Special English, I'm Carolyn Presutti. For more about education, go to our website, voaspecialenglish.com.